Chapter 9. Cacao. At least I grasp its effectiveness now, Jinshi said with an annoyed glance at Mau. As do I, Mau said. Jinshi looked almost overcome by the catastrophic scene in front of him. Ugh, he said, and there was no hint of his usual detached smile. There was only fatigue on his face. How did this happen? To answer that question, we'll have to go back in time a few hours. The cacao they were sent was no longer in seed form, but had been powdered. All the other ingredients Mau had requested had already arrived at the kitchen of the Jade Pavilion. 3 of the ladies-in-waiting were busy trying to look on, but a word from Hongyang set them scurrying back to their work. Milk, butter, sugar, honey, distilled spirits, and dried fruits, and some oils derived from aromatic herbs to give everything a pleasant odor. All nutritious and expensive ingredients, and all useful in a stamina concoction. Mau had tasted cacao only once. It had been in a hardened, sweetened form called chocolate, and she had received it from one of the prostitutes. It had been a piece hardly the size of a tip of her finger, but on eating it, she felt she had drunk an entire cup of some especially sharp liquor. It made her oddly giddy. The chocolate was, the woman had explained, a gift from an especially nasty customer who had hoped to buy the affections of a girl who had been sold into prostitution by offering her a rare treat. When the girl noticed Mau's altered state, however, she was deeply angry, and the madam of the brothel forbade the customer from coming back. It came to light later that a trading concern had started to settle the stuff as an aphrodisiac. Mau had managed to obtain a handful of seeds since then, but she had never used them as medicine. No one in the red light district came to the apothecary seeking something so extravagant for a simple medicament. Even now, Mau remembered the chocolate for the way it had been hardened with oil and fat. Her wide experience with an eclectic collection of medicines and poisons and all their various flavors and aromas naturally also gave her an excellent memory for ingredients. It was still the hot season, and she suspected butter wouldn't set well, so she decided to cover some fruit instead. A bit of ice would be perfect, but that was of course impossible and didn't make the ingredients list. Instead, she asked for a large, unglazed water jug to be prepared. It was filled half full with water. As the water evaporated, the inside of the jug would become cooler than the outside air, cool enough to help harden the fats. Mau dipped a spoon into the mixture and tasted a bit of it. It was bitter and sweet at the same time, and her knowledgeable tongue likewise detected elements that would improve the mood. She was far more resistant to things like alcohol and toxins now than she had been when she'd first had a taste of chocolate, but it didn't affect her nearly as much. But she could still tell it was powerful stuff. Maybe I should make the potions a bit smaller. She chopped the fruit in half with a simple cleaver, then dipped them in the brownish liquid. She put them on a plate, then placed them in the jug. She put a lid on the jug, then covered it with a straw mat to hide it. The only thing left was to wait for the chocolate to harden. Jinshi would come by to collect it that evening. That should be plenty of time. Guess I've got a little extra. She hadn't used all of the brownish liquid. The ingredients were extremely expensive, and it was quite nutritious. Aphrodisiac or not, it had a minimal effect on Mau, so she decided to eat it herself later. She chopped some bread into cubes and soaked them in the stuff. This way she wouldn't have to worry about any cooling process either. She put a lid on the jar of cacao liquid and set it on the shelf. The rest of the ingredients she put in her own room, then headed for the washing area to clean the utensils. She should have put the dipped bread in her room, too, but she was already thinking about other things. Maybe her taste testing had left her a little inebriated. Well, it was too late now. It happened after that, while Mau was out running errands for Hongyang, stopping off along the way to pick some medicinal herbs for herself. The bread, and the fact that it should have gone on the shelf, were chased clear out of Mama's mind. She returned with a laundry basket full of herbs, thoroughly pleased with herself, only to be greeted by Hongyang and consort Kyokyo, looking deathly pale and rather disturbed, respectively. Gaoxuan was there too, which implied Jinshi was somewhere about. Hongyang could only put a hand to her forehead and point to the kitchen, so Mama pressed her laundry basket into Gaoxuan's arms and headed over. She discovered Jinshi looking annoyed. The delicate way to put it would be to say that a great medley of peach and light red colors spread before her, which is to say, more plainly, that 3 ladies-in-waiting were all leaning against each other, sound asleep. Their clothes were in disarray, their disheveled skirts revealing lascivious glimpses of thigh. "What happened here?" Hongyang demanded of Mau. "I'm afraid I'm not best placed to answer that question," she replied. She went over to the 3 young women and crouched down, flipping down their skirts and examining them. "It's all right. This attempt failed to—" Hongyang, blushing furiously, smacked Mau on the back of the head. Sitting on the table was the brown-colored bread. 3 pieces were missing. The girls had mistaken it for an afternoon snack. The fatigue caught up with her after they had each put the girls to bed in their own room. In the sitting room, Gyokyo and Jinshi were looking at the chocolate bread with some wonder. "Is this your aphrodisiac?" Gyokyo inquired. "No, ma'am, this is." Mama gave her the chocolate-covered fruit, approximately 30 pieces, each the size of a thumbnail. "What is this, then?" Jinshi asked. "It was supposed to be my bedtime snack." Everyone seemed to recoil a little at that. Had she said something wrong? Gaoshun and Hongyang both looked like they could hardly believe their eyes. "I'm very accustomed to spirits and stimulants, so I don't feel them much." Mau had once, in the name of science, pickled a venomous snake in alcohol and drunk it, so she could safely be called an experienced drinker. She considered alcohol to be a kind of medicine. The more susceptible one was to new forms of stimulation, the better medicine worked on one. Take this bread, for instance. Here in the Jade Pavilion, it passed for an aphrodisiac, but she had to think that in the land where the ingredients had come from, it would be substantially less effective. Jinshi picked up one of the pieces of bread and looked at it doubtfully. "I wonder if I might safely try a piece then," he said. "No, sir, don't!" Hongyang and Gaoshun cried almost in unison. Mau thought this was the first time she had heard Gaoshun speak. Jinshi put the bread back, remarking that he had only been joking. It would, of course, have been improper for him to consume a known aphrodisiac in the presence of the Emperor's own favorite consort, but perhaps even more to the point, hardly anyone could have resisted him had he come to her with that nymph-like smile and a flush on his cheeks. His face, if nothing else, Mama reflected, did him credit. "Perhaps I would make some for His Majesty," Gyokyo said with amusement. "It might keep him from his usual ways." "It would most likely work about 3 times better than a typical stamina medication," Mamo informed her. At this, Gyokyo's face took on a cast that was hard to read. 3 times? She mumbled, something about whether she could endure so long, but those present affected not to have heard her. It seemed it wasn't easy being a concubine. Mama put the aphrodisiacs in a covered jar and handed it to Jinshi. "They're quite potent, so I recommend taking just one at a time. Taking too many could overstimulate the blood flow and produce a nosebleed. Also, consumption should be limited to when the patient is alone with their partner." With these instructions duly conveyed, Jinshi stood up. Gaoshun and Hongyang left the room to prepare for his departure. Consort Gyokyo likewise nodded to him, then left with the sleeping princess in a carrier. As Mama went to clean up the plate of bread, she smelled a sweet aroma from behind her. "Thank you. I put you to quite a bit of trouble." The voice was sweet, too, like honey. Mama felt her hair being lifted up, and something cold was pressed against her neck. She turned in time to see Jinshi waving at her as he left the room. "I get it." When she looked at the plate, she discovered one of the pieces of bread was missing. She had an idea where it was. "I just hope no one gets hurt," Mama muttered, but she didn't seem to think it had much to do with her. The night was still young. Chapter 10. The Unsaddling Matter of the Spirit, Part 1. Yinghua, lady-in-waiting to the Emperor's favorite consort, Gyokyo, was faithfully at her work, as she was every day. All right, so she had fallen asleep on the job the other day, but her gracious mistress had forborne to punish her. The only way to repay her, then, was to work herself to the bone. She would make sure she polished every windowsill, every railing, until it gleamed. This was not normally something a lady-in-waiting would be expected to do, but Yinghua was not above doing a serving girl's work. Consort Gyokyo had said how much she liked hard workers. Consort Gyokyo and Yinghua both came from a town in the west. The climate there was dry, and the area had no special resources to speak of, and was periodically subject to drought. Yinghua and the other ladies-in-waiting were all officials' daughters, but she didn't recall her life in her hometown as especially luxurious. It had been the sort of impoverished place where even a child of the bureaucracy had to work if she didn't want to starve. And then Gyokyo was taken into the palace, and the world began to take note of her home. When the consort received the special attentions of the emperor, the central bureaucracy could no longer hide where she had come from. But Gyokyo was an intelligent woman. She wasn't content simply to be a pampered ornament, and Yinghua was bent on following her lady wherever she might go, including into the rear palace. Not all of Gyokyo's ladies showed the same dedication, but those who remained simply resolved to work even harder to make up the difference. When Yinghua went into the kitchen to organize the utensils, she discovered the new girl there, making something. Mama was her name, Yinghua recalled, but she had proven so taciturn that nobody was sure what kind of person she really was. Consort Gyokyo was an uncommonly strong judge of character, however, so it was unlikely Mama was a bad egg. Indeed, Yinghua felt sorry for her. The scars on her arm obviously bespoke a history of abuse, after which she had been sold into service and now brought on to taste food for poison. It was enough to bring a tear to a lady-in-waiting's eye. They kept increasing her portions at dinner, hoping to plumpen the spindly girl, and they refused to let her do the cleaning so that she wouldn't have to reveal her injuries to the wider world. Yinghua and her two fellow ladies-in-waiting were of one mind in all of this, and as a result, Mama frequently found herself with little to do. Yinghua was happy enough with that. She and the other girls were more than capable of handling the work by themselves. Hung Yang, the chief lady-in-waiting, didn't precisely agree and at least gave Mama the washing to take care of. It was just carrying the laundry around in a basket so her scars wouldn't be obvious. She also engaged Mama for miscellaneous chores when necessary. Carting around laundry baskets also wasn't the work of a lady-in-waiting, but was properly done by the serving girls from the large communal rooms. But ever since a poison needle had been discovered in Consort Gyokyo's clothing once, Yinghua and the others had taken to handling the wash themselves. It was incidents like this that inspired them to debase themselves, as if they were simple serving women. Here in the rear palace, they were surrounded by enemies. "What are you making?" Mama was boiling something that looked like grass in a stew pot. "It's a cold remedy." She always answered with the absolute minimum of words. It was understandable, poignant, in fact, to realize how hard she must find it to get close to people as a result of her abuse. Mama was profoundly knowledgeable about medicine, and occasionally made some like this. She always cleaned up after herself neatly, and the anti-chapping ointment she'd given Yinghua recently was precious stuff, so Yinghua didn't object. Sometimes Mama even produced the concoctions at Hung Yang's request. Yinghua took down some silver dishes and began diligently polishing them with a dry cloth. Mama rarely said much, but she knew how to be a polite listener in a conversation, so it never hurt to talk to her. And that's what Yinghua did, telling her about some rumors she'd heard recently, stories of a pale woman who danced through the air. Mama headed for the medical office with her completed cold remedy and a basket of laundry. It was the doctor's right to give his imprimatur to any medicine, even if it was only for form's sake. Did this spirit suddenly pop up in the last month? Mama shook her head at the garden variety ghost story. She hadn't heard anything of the sort prior to arriving at the Jade Pavilion, and because she trusted Xiaolon to tell her anything worth hearing, she had to think the rumor was a recent one. The rear palace was surrounded by what amounted to castle walls. The gates in each wall were the only ways in or out. A deep moat on the far side of the barrier prevented both intrusion and escape. Some said there were former concubines, would-be escapees from the rear palace, sunk at the bottom of that moat even now. So the ghost is supposed to show up near the gate, huh? There were no buildings in the immediate area, just a spreading pine forest. Started around the end of summer. It was the time for harvesting a certain something. No sooner had she had this naughty little thought than Mama heard a voice. One she was not pleased by, but which always seemed to be after her specifically. "Hard at work again, I see." Mama met the man's smile, lovely as a peony blossom, with studious indifference. "Hardly working, sir, I assure you." The medical office was beside the central gate to the south, near the headquarters of the 3 major offices that oversaw the running of the rear palace. Jinchi could be seen there often. As a eunuch, his proper place was in the domestic service department, but this man seemed to have no specific place of employment. Indeed, he almost seemed to oversee the entire palace. It's almost like he's over the head of the matron of the serving women. It was always possible he was the current emperor's guardian, but considering Jinchi looked to be about 20 years old, it was hard to imagine. Maybe he was the son of the emperor or something, but then why become a eunuch? He seemed close with Consort Gyokyo. Maybe he was her guardian instead. Or perhaps the emperor's lover? Relations between the emperor and Gyokyo always seemed perfectly normal when His Majesty came for his visits, but things weren't always what they seemed. Mama got tired of trying to play out the possibilities, though, and so settled on this last one. That was easiest. "Your face says you're having the world's most impertinent thought," Jinchi said, squinting at her. "Are you sure you're not just imagining it?" She bowed to him and ducked into the medical office, where the loach-mustached quack of a doctor was industriously pulverizing something in a mortar. Mama grasped that in this case, this wasn't a step in making some medical concoction, but simply a way of passing the time. Otherwise, why would he need her to give him any medicine she made? The doctor didn't seem to know but the most rudimentary medicinal recipes or techniques. The medical staff was perpetually short-handed, as one might surmise of the rear palace. Women were not allowed to become doctors, and while many men might wish to be, few wished also to become eunuchs. The old quack here at first treated Mama like a distracting little girl, but his attitude softened when he saw the medicines she made. Now he would put out tea and snacks and gladly share with her any ingredients she needed. But while she was grateful for this, she did question what it said about him as a physician. Confidentiality seemed of little concern to him. I wonder if this is remotely all right. Mama would entertain the thought, but she wouldn't say anything. The current arrangement was far too convenient for her. Would you be so kind as to check this medicine I've made? Ah, hello, young lady. Of course. Hold on just a moment. He brought out snacks and some kind of tea. No more sweet buns. There were rice crackers today. That was fine by Mamo, who preferred a hotter flavor. It seemed that the doctor had been so gracious as to remember her preferences. She'd had the continual feeling that he was trying to ingratiate himself with her, but it didn't bother her. He might have been a quack, but he was a decent person. Surely there's enough for me, too, a honeyed voice said from behind her. She didn't have to turn around. She could practically feel his effulgence in the air. You must know by now who it was. Jinshi in the flesh. The doctor, with a mixture of surprise and excitement, promptly changed the crackers and sacha, old tea with flavorings, for more desirable white tea and mooncakes. My rice crackers. The beaming smile seated itself beside Mamau. By dint of social difference, they should never have found themselves sitting side by side, and yet here they were. It might have looked like a gesture of utmost magnanimity, but Mama felt something very different in it, something pointed and forceful. I'm sorry for the trouble, doctor, but could you go bend the back and fetch these for me? Jinshi handed the quack a slip of paper. Even without getting a clear look at it, Mama could see an abundant list of medicines. It would keep the doctor occupied for a while. The quack squinted at the list, then retreated ruefully into the back room. So that was the plan all along. What exactly do you want? Mau asked bluntly, sipping her tea. Have you heard about the commotion concerning the ghost? No more than rumors. Then have you heard of somnambulism? The sparkle that lit in Mama's eye at that word wasn't lost on Jinshi. A naughty bit of satisfaction entered his lovely smile. He brushed Mama's cheek with his broad palm. And would you know how to cure it? His voice was as sweet as a fruit liqueur. I haven't the foggiest idea. Mama refused to be self-deprecating, but she didn't want to overstate her abilities either. She'd encountered virtually every kind of illness, though, and seen many of them in patients. Thus she could say with confidence what she said next. It can't be helped with medicine. It was a disease of the spirit. When a prostitute had been afflicted with this illness, Mama's father had done nothing to treat it because there was no treatment to give. But with something other than medicine, Jinshi wanted to know any potential cure at all. My specialty is pharmaceuticals. She thought that was about as emphatic as she could be, but then she realized she could still see the lovely face, now wreathed in distress, floating in her peripheral vision. Don't look him in the eye. Mau avoided his gaze as if he were a wild animal, or at least she tried to, but it just wasn't possible. He slid around so he was facing her. Talk about persistent, talk about annoying. Mama had no choice but to admit defeat. Fine, I'll help you, she said, but she was careful to look very unhappy about it. Gashwin arrived to fetch her around midnight. They were going out to witness the illness in question. Gashwin's taciturn nature and often expressionless face could have made him seem unapproachable, but Mau actually rather liked it. Sweet treats went best with pickled foods. Gashwin made the perfect complement to Jinshi's saccharine attitude. He doesn't come across like a eunuch. Many eunuchs became effeminate because their biological yang had been forcibly removed. They grew minimal body hair, had gentle personalities, and a disposition to obesity as their sexual appetites were replaced by culinary ones. The quack doctor was the most obvious example. He looked like any other middle-aged man, but his speech made him sound like the mistress of some well-to-do merchant household. Gashwin, for his part, didn't have much body hair, but what was there was thick and black, and if he hadn't lived in the rear palace, it would have been easy to take him for a military official. I wonder what brought him to choose this path. Wonder she might, but even Mamo understood that actually asking would be beyond the pale. She simply nodded in silence and went with him. Gashwin led the way, holding a lantern in one hand. The moon was only half full, but it was a cloudless night, and all its light reached them. Mamo had never been out in the rear palace so late at night. It was like a different world. Once in a while she thought she heard rustling and maybe some moaning from the bushes here or there, but she determined to ignore it. The emperor was the only proper man allowed in the rear palace, so it wasn't the lady's fault if romantic encounters here started to take on less typical forms. Mistress Mau, Gashwin began, but Mau felt some compunction at the polite mode of address. Please, you needn't call me that, she said. Your station is so far above mine, Master Gashwin. Gashwin ran his hand along his chin as he considered this. Finally he said, Xiao Mao, then. A diminutive form of her name that was very much the polar opposite of Miss Mau Mau. That's maybe a little too familiar, Mau Mau thought, realizing that perhaps Gashwin had a lighter heart than first appeared, but nonetheless she nodded. Perhaps, Gashwin ventured now, I might ask you to stop regarding Master Jinshi in the same manner in which you might look at a worm. Damn, they noticed. Her reactions had been growing too automatic recently. Her poker face could no longer hide them. She didn't expect to be beheaded for it on the spot or anything, but she would have to control herself. From the perspective of these notables, it was Mau Mau who was the worm. Why, today he reported to me that you gazed at him as though he were a slug. Well, he certainly seemed especially slimy. The fact that he informed Gashwin of Mau Mau's every disparaging glance, she thought, spoke to both his tenacity and his sliminess. It didn't say much for him as a man, or former man, perhaps. He smiled so broadly as he told me, his eyes brimming and his whole body trembling. Truly, I've never seen joy so singularly expressed. Mau Mau greeted Gashwin's description. Surely he knew it could only possibly cause misunderstanding, with total seriousness. As a matter of fact, she was privately demoting Jinshi from worm to filth as she replied, I'll be more mindful in the future. Thank you. Those with no immunity do tend to swoon at a glance. It's quite an effort to keep on top of it. The sign with which Gashwin accompanied this remark carried an unmistakable note of frustration. Mau Mau surmised that this was not the first time he'd had to clean up after Jinshi. Having a superior who was too pure was its own kind of difficulty. The course of this tiring conversation brought them to the gate on the east side. The walls were about 4 times as tall as Mau Mau. The great deep moat on the other side necessitated a bridge be lowered when provisions or supplies were brought in, or at the occasional changes of serving girls. In short, to flee the rear palace was to face the ultimate punishment. The entry was a double gate with a guardhouse on both sides, and the gate was always guarded. 2 eunuchs on the inside, 2 soldiers on the outside. The drawbridge was too heavy to raise or lower by manpower alone, so 2 head of oxen were on hand to do the job. Mau Mau was seized by the desire to go into the nearby pine forest to look for ingredients, but with Gashwin there she had to restrain herself. Instead, she sat down in the open-air pavilion in the garden. And then, there in the light of the half-moon, she appeared. There she is, Gashwin said, pointing. Mau Mau looked and saw something unbelievable, the figure of a pale woman almost floating through the air. Her long dress trailed behind her, her feet moving gracefully atop the wall as if in a dance. She shivered, and her clothing rippled as if it were alive. Her long black hair shimmered in the dark, lending her a sort of faint halo. She was so beautiful she seemed almost unreal. It was like something out of a fantasy, as though they had wandered into the legendary peach village. Like a hibiscus under the stars, Mau Mau said suddenly. Gashwin looked surprised, but then murmured, You're a quick study. The woman's name was Fuyo, hibiscus, and she was a middle-ranked consort, and the next month she was to be given in marriage to a certain official as a reward for his fine work.